Welcome to Stop Talking, Start Doing, How to Support Women in the Return to Workplaces in 2022. I'm Romy Newman. I'm the co-founder of Fairygodboss, and we have an incredible panel for you today about an important topic. I'm sure many of you have seen the jobs data that was released this week, showing that we still see women lagging men significantly re-entering the workplace. And we know that most workplaces still have not reopened, especially for knowledge workers. And so the question is, what's going to happen when we all do go back into the office? And is it going to further contribute to this skew in the numbers where we see many more men at work or in a better position because they're in the workplace, in the office, than women? So in case you don't know, Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women, and we're totally free for users. So we'd love you all to join our very active community of women who come together to support each other. I do have some housekeeping before we get started. We love your participation, so please comment as we go along in the chat, and we will take Q&A at the end. So please, if you have questions for the panelists, you can put it at any point in Q&A, and we will take them as we go along. Also, we will record, and we will send out the recording when we're done. I did want to thank our partners and our major sponsor, Tara Health Foundation. Tara Health Foundation is a not-for-profit that promotes health, well-being, and opportunity for women and girls by strategically investing our financial and human capital, or their financial and human capital, in innovative, evidence-informed programs. We have together created an amazing toolkit that tackles some of the issues that women's employee resource groups can move forward on internally and externally through advocacy. So this is our second webinar in a series of 4 with Tara Health Foundation on how you all can help make change through work in the workplace. We're also so excited to have Erin Grau as our moderator. Erin Grau is the co-founder and COO of Charter. In case you're not familiar, coming out of this, you should definitely subscribe to Charter. Charter's mission is to transform every workplace and catalyze a new era of dynamic organizations where all workers thrive. Charter does it by bridging research to practice and giving a tactical playbook for what work can and should be. So please sign up for their newsletter, and you'll get all the latest on returning to the office. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, Erin. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Romy. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited we have this incredible group of women. So first, we have an author and innovative HR leader, Vice Media's Chief People Officer, Daisy Auger-Dominguez. We have Nikoa Miton, the co-founder of Level, a multiracial professional women's network focused on racial equity. And rounding out this incredible group of women is Massella Dukuly, a leadership trainer who has trained more than 10,000 employees around the globe and now focuses on team enablement. So first, I want to give them each a chance to introduce themselves to you with a few words about what they do and their experience. So Daisy, I want to start with you.
Thank you, Erin. Hi, everyone. I'm Daisy Auger-Dominguez, Chief People Officer at Vice Media Group. I joined Vice in May of 2020 during the pandemic, as many of us may know. So I was one of those early entrants to organizations being fully remote. And I run a global traditional HR team, but very untraditional in what we do because we integrate equity into every aspect of the full employee life journey, from sourcing to recruiting to onboarding to performance management, development and growth through their last days in the company. We make sure that we treat every employee with dignity, fairness, and support their well-being and growth. I have had a career in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for over 2 decades. I've worked at Disney, at Google, at Viacom. I've launched my own consultancy, and I am thrilled to be here with all of you as I gear up for the launch of my first book about inclusion in the workplace, Inclusion Revolution, which comes out next month. So lots going on. Lovely to be here.
Nikoa.
Hi, everyone. I am Nikoa Milton, and I am a self-proclaimed corporate America dropout. I'm also the co-founder of Level, and prior to founding Level, I spent 15 years in finance and commercial real estate, and those spaces were toxic. and detrimental to both my physical and mental health. So I took those traumatic experiences to fuel my current work at Level, which is an intentionally multiracial network of women identifying people who come together for the purpose of closing the racial wealth gap by investing in Black women.
Amazing.
Facts to follow. I'm Massella Dukuly. I am the Director of Team Enablement at LifeLabs Learning. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. As Erin mentioned, part of what I've done at LifeLabs for the past 4.5 years was spent with leaders all over the world, actually, which is really exciting. But we had an opportunity to, or personally, I've had an opportunity to work with over 10,000 different clients, teaching hundreds of different workshops, all on how to be a better manager, a better leader. And now my work is internal. And so I am leading up our team enablement department. And what that encompasses is things like performance assessment, onboarding, and of course, learning and development at full scale for the entire employee journey. I think what's most exciting about that is that LifeLabs has always been a place that has focused on innovation. And so when we think about remote work, we've been doing that since like 5 years prior to when this pandemic started. And I remember people saying like, it's crazy that, half of your team doesn't come into the office Monday through Thursday, but it was quite normal then. So our ideas about how to make sure that your workplace is accessible and impactful and productive for every person that is there is at the forefront of what we're doing. And I'm excited to share a little bit of what we've seen that works and hopefully get you on the right path as you think about the return to workplace, especially for women.
Thank you. I am so excited to get into it. So today we're talking about the return to office, but we don't want to go back to work. We want to go forward, right? So we're going to talk about equity, hybrid work and flexibility, and how to support all women in this new era of work. So our lives are more intertwined with work than ever. And yet the way that we work is outdated. We're at a breaking point. I'm going to share a couple of data points. So more than half of workers are looking to quit their job. Roughly 1/3 say that their mental health has declined. Millions of mothers have dropped out of the workforce entirely. Women of color and transgender workers have actually experienced increased harassment while working remote. 60% of the American workforce is paid by the hour, while the federal minimum wage is stuck at $7.25. And there are 23 million low-wage workers. 2/3 of them are women. And as Romy mentioned earlier, in January alone, 27 times more men joined the workforce in January than women, 27 times. So where do we go from here? Daisy, I want to start with you. How have you seen organizations, leaders, ERGs evolve in the past 2 years to meet the needs of women in this moment of crisis?
Erin, I don't think there's an organization out there that's not trying to figure out how to meet the needs of women. Some of them by default, some of them intentionally, and some of them because they're being pushed to think about it in ways that they haven't before. But by and large, organizations have had to face these inequities and these gaps and what I call really just obstacles for success and access and opportunity for so many women in the workplace. I have to tell you, we call them community groups at Vice, employee resource groups. Our community groups have been really amazing. And what we have is a families group and we have a women's group, and they're all global, but they've actually started partnering on a lot of their initiatives. But obviously our families group is multi-gendered. Our women's group is defined as women and women identifying, but they've actually led a lot of work in the UK and in the US around policies, right? When I joined Vice, we undertook this effort around reviewing all of our global policies, and these employee resource groups these community groups, as we call them, became a source for the real data on the ground, because the sore spots of an organization are really felt on the ground, right? A lot of these decisions get done up here, but the people who need the access, who can tell you, well, I don't need Bright Horizons because I can't take my kid, and sorry if people use Bright Horizons, but I can't take my kid to Bright Horizons right now because we're under a pandemic. So what kind of support can you get me for someone coming to my house that has been either vetted by an organization or frankly that I can vet? And so we found a vendor that allows for backup childcare that is not only within the network of individuals that are in that organization, but if I as a parent have worked with someone, I can get them credited to be part of that network, and I get the support from the organization. And so those were some of the examples of the pieces that we started seeing that have come from our employee resource groups. But one of the things is that I want to ask, and it's one of the biggest challenges that I find is, have our workforces significantly become more diverse than in the summer of 2020? And if you look around your workplace, are there more BIPOC and women in management and leadership roles? If you're a Black, Indigenous person of color who identifies as a woman, have you felt a shift in how managers are treating you, supporting you, advancing you? Has there been a shift in who is leading and defining and driving and getting paid for the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organizations? I think if we were to ask those questions to many of us in workplaces, the answer would be no, no, and no. And so while I'm saying on the one hand that there's a lot that's been talked about and developed and put together, the experience of women in the workplace is still significantly limited.
Right. So we're talking a lot about, shifting to hybrid work or flexible work, and if done right, you can get the benefits of remote work and the strengths of co-location. And so I'm curious, I think a lot of people here probably when they're thinking about return to office are thinking about these hybrid work arrangements and work models. And I'm curious, Massella, maybe I'll start with you. Like, do you think hybrid work can be better for women? And if so, how?
Yeah, so I believe that hybrid work can absolutely be better for women, for everyone. But I think to Daisy's point around, the answer to her question being no, no, and no, it often comes down to the fact that companies, leaders are confusing good intentions with systems that are actually built to help people be successful. So sure, you can have a hybrid work environment, but if I have to feel as though, man, I need to spend, the hours of midnight to 2 a.m. to prove that I deserve to be hybrid because I had to take my kid to school, or that I had to go to a doctor's appointment, or whatever the case might be, that is obviously not going to work in the long term. And nonetheless, the only thing that it does is sort of perpetuates this idea that it works for some people and not for others. So in terms of what do we do? How do we kind of make it better? I think we need to kind of first sit down and think about what it means to be a hybrid work environment. What we've seen at LifeLabs that I think is really helpful is building out a work environment that is actually remote first. We are remote first, and sure, if you come into the office, that's a beautiful thing. We'll set up systems that work that way. But even just a small example, we used to, and this is maybe 2017, 2018, we had teams in the Bay Area. And so every week, our small team of 15 people would get together. You've got 5 people in SF and the rest of the team in Brooklyn. And we are in one conference room together talking, and our SF people could barely get into the conversation. From there, what we decided to do is one face to a screen. So we'd have a speaker in the room. And instead, we've been doing this sort of Zoom Brady Bunch deal for a long time, but it changed things because that's just how it works. And what you'll see now is most people are doing it this way. But what happens when we get back into the office? Now, all of a sudden, our remote people are sort of lost in the ether. And so it comes down to everything. That's just a small example, but you really want to think about what would it take for this work environment to be accessible, useful, and really just something that everybody benefits from rather than only a few people.
Right. We talked a little bit about flexibility too. I'm curious how we know that women, caregivers, and people of color are the ones that actually have the strongest desire for more flexibility, and actually have seen, especially for employees of color, have seen gains in employee experience scores while working remotely. And so I'm curious how you're all thinking about flexibility in different ways, especially in the return.
Well, I can speak about our return because we're right in the middle of it, and we like many other companies have had false starts, right? We started easing in, as I called it. That was my term. It never really stuck because I'm not really a brander, but I kept on saying we're not calling it return to offices because we don't still know what's going to happen. Let's just ease back into offices and see how that works. We eased back in October of last year, but we spent all of last summer basically codifying all of our employees into a hybrid model. And so everyone was categorized into either work mostly in office, mostly out of office, or hybrid, what we're defining as 2 to 4 days in the office. So we spent all of that time last summer defining, and it was working with managers based on businesses and locations. And outside of the US, there's other geography challenges that we have to face. So in October, when we came back, everyone mostly came back with a hybrid model. And my team, for example, was coming back 2 days a week. So my team was coming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I intentionally defined the days that we were coming because I wanted to come. And that was, I think, part of your question. It was, I wanted to come back to the office for the collaboration, for the energy, for the connection, so that workspaces are not going to be hubs of collaboration and creativity. They're no longer going to be places where we go to do work per se, right? They're going to be places where we all connect. And so we wanted to start shifting that. Obviously, Omicron had other ideas, so we had to close our offices in December, and we're coming back now in March, and we're basically just easing back into the same model. We have already everyone's categories, and we are giving a lot of freedom to managers, but also a lot of coaching. So we created a hybrid management guide that we've made available publicly to help managers think through. And I think Massella's point was spot on, is okay, well now, and it happened to me, I came back to the office. I remember my first day, I was locked up in my office all day long in meetings back to back. I couldn't even get out to do what I had said we wanted to do, which is like hug and, and touch and be with my team, because I was in all of these meetings because I was still operating in the old model, right? Now this is what we're calling the new model, is going to soon be called the old model, which is all day in videos and Zooms. And so now we're going to have to adjust to what that looks like. And that means that we're going to have to be readjusting our calendars, readjusting the times that we're in the office. How much more time do I create to be with team members? And that means that we have to, a lot is coming at managers, right? And that means that managers have to rethink how they engage and connect. And so we've been applying it from a resources and toolkit perspective, helping managers gain more confidence and competence in managing that, and also allowing ourselves some slack. We're not going to get it right away, right? We all were so used to this heavy pace of work in person before. Then we got sadly used to this heavy pace of work on video, and now we're going to have to find that in between. And I think it's going to take us a couple of months to get there, if at all. And we're going to be renegotiating people's spaces, flexibility. What do you want? We're starting to use apps, which a lot of companies are, to register people. We're starting to use the toolkits that we put together. We're starting to even look at it from a performance management perspective and giving meeting guidance, so that if not everyone, this is typical, we've been sharing it a lot. If you're doing a hybrid meeting, who is the person leading the hybrid portion, the virtual portion, and who's the person leading the in-person portion, so that you create some, equal experience for those that are in the room that can't like raise their hand and say, hey, I want to talk. So it's going to be a big period of experimentation.
It is. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I would love to share your guide. 1, 2, I think that what you said about, the office now being a tool to get work done, not a place to get work done, I think is a really big shift that a lot of companies haven't quite made yet. So yeah, I'm very excited to talk about managers also soon. But actually, Nikoa, I wanna ask you. So you founded this really diverse network. There are women from Peloton and Google and New York Times. I'm curious your advice to organizations if they want to retain and attract Black women and women of color in their workplaces.
That's a huge question. And, I've thought long and hard about this. It's taken me a couple of years to even entertain the idea that Black women specifically should occupy these spaces. And I often come to the conclusion that corporate America alone cannot fix America's problem with race and with gender. Corporate America is just an extension of America's huge problem. And in order for the people that make up corporate America to be more inclusive, in order for them to be more inclusive of diversity, they need to change their behaviors outside of the workplace to create work environments that are safe for Black and brown women. And I get this question a lot from folks within these organizations, and I often turn the question back to them and I ask them, do you live in a diverse neighborhood? And if so, do you have any meaningful interactions with your neighbors? Do your children see diversity in school? and not just the 2 to 3 token children of color, but like actual diversity. Do you have Black friends that actually talk to you about race? And does equity work actually impact your organization's bottom line? And what I'm really getting at is that equity work just can't take place from 9 to 5. It's a 24/7 job, just like being a Black woman who deals with racism is a 24/7 job. And if companies are really serious about creating spaces where Black women and women of color feel valued, then the work needs to impact the company's bottom line. Managers need to be measured, their performance needs to be measured on how inclusive, not just the number of Black women who occupy the seats, but like, how do they feel showing up to your workplace, your workplace? Because we have to work, like we don't have resources such that we can not occupy these spaces. So sure, I think organizations can offer solutions that support women of color, but until people truly get to know Black women and our plight, then there's very little that these organizations can do to retain Black women and keep them happy in the long run.
Wow, there's a lot there. That was, I think one thing that we know a lot of ERG leaders and DEI leaders are thinking about in the return, at least we hope, is they're thinking about belonging. And so I'm curious what advice that you have, all of you actually, to how do you create a true sense of belonging for women and women of color? And what does it mean to belong to an organization? I know, Nikoa, you just kind of answered that so beautifully. I'm curious if you have any like more tactical advice in the next few months, specifically in the return, that organizations can be doing.
So I don't know about tactical advice, but I can take a stab of what it means to me to belong based on my personal experience. And theoretically, it's quite simple. But I don't know how orgs get there in practice. I want to be able to show up as my full self with my locks and my bright nails and all of my Black girlisms, without the fear of being viewed as less than. I also want to be certain that there will be consequences for racism and microaggressions. I always say that, I showed up in corporate America as 20% of myself. And I think, that's true for many Black women. We hide a huge portion of who we are. Our work voices aren't even like our real voices, y'all. But, in order for us to show up as our full selves, the other people in these companies that occupy these spaces, they have to have a better understanding of who Black and brown women actually are. And we're traumatized. I think it starts there. And until we get there, we're just putting a Band-Aid on what the real issues are.
Thank you for sharing all that, Nikoa. It's so important. Daisy, there are a lot of head nods. I know that you have a lot to add here too. So what's your advice around?
Massella wanted to jump in.
Massella, yeah.
Thanks, Daisy. Yeah, I was just going to add, I think what Nikoa is bringing up, and also a few things I saw in the chat, people talking about how none of this is cookie cutter, is the same thing when it comes to Black women, BIPOC women, and any person, right? Like we are all different and we all have different needs and we all have different experiences. So to hear or read once in June of 2020 that like you should call your Black friends is not the thing that we need to just like, great golden rule. If you have Black employees, women, men, whatever, this is your opportunity to kind of say, well, how can I really understand what it means to be inclusive? What are these people specifically looking for? It's really nice even to come to something like this panel, but like, don't talk to me, talk to your people. What is it that your folks need to actually support them? Because I think it's going to look different and it'll help you sort of unearth the areas where there's probably more opportunity to be able to set people up for success. And I think the other thing to remember is that even as a Black person, so here I am, Black woman in the room, my experience might be very different from another Black woman. So sometimes what doesn't seem like a big deal to me is really a big deal to someone else. And I've learned that the hard way, where I'm like, oh my gosh, I assumed that just because we might look the same, that what works for me is going to work for you. Even things as simple as how long you've been tenured at an organization. So for me at LifeLabs, I'm employee number 12. My experience versus employee 140 something who might be a Black woman look different. My comfort level, my fear of getting fired, I love LifeLabs, not trying to get fired, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just a little different. And so our approach to this needs to be individualized. And I think this is where managers really play a role in getting that information. Surveys are nice, but they're not all encompassing because of the trauma that Nikoa was talking about. It has not been safe for people to put into a survey that they feel uncomfortable with their manager because, well, what happens to me next? So instead, the relationship aspect of this is very big.
I think that's so spot on. And Nikoa, I think you started by saying you didn't know how to what it was, and then you basically told us what it was, right? And how to do it. And I think that's so important, because a lot of organizations, and I've seen so many leaders and managers that want to do the right thing, but they don't know where to start, and they just feel that it's so big, it's so much, I don't know enough, and so they just get paralyzed. Fear paralyzes them into doing nothing. And so that's, having spent the bulk of my career in corporate America, I always look at it. I was like, this is how you operationalize anything, right? You are operationalizing your product launches, your content drops, all of these pieces. How do we operationalize inclusion in the workplace? How do we operationalize belonging, psychological safety? All of these are elements that can be operationalized, and it's everything from making sure that the behaviors that employees are being measured against include and integrate inclusion in them. It's making sure that your performance management processes speak about unbiasing decisions and that you name it, that you name how it impacts women of color, people of color, marginalized employees, non-binary, everything, that you actually name it. And I am really proud of working for a youth media company where, frankly, that naming has always been there, right? Like, I came from companies where you couldn't even say the word race even before 2020, right? Now we're all saying it, but advice that's something that's always been there. But that doesn't mean that bias hasn't crept up across management and leadership pieces. And so we needed to make sure that we were operationalizing this in our code of conduct, that it's clearly written. To your point, Massella and Nikoa, you both brought this up. It was like, what happens when you don't abide by our code of conduct? What happens when we actually use the word microaggression in our code of conduct and our safety in the workplace. And I remember employees saying, I was like, oh, I haven't seen that in language. I was like, well, we need to talk about microaggressions because they exist and they happen every day. And the experience of women of color in the workplace is still like walking a tightrope, right? I still every day have to decide, and Massella, I am incredibly privileged and have incredible power. I sit in the C-suite, but I still have to decide when I'm in meetings, what side of myself to bring to the conversation. I still find myself measuring how much, how emotional do I get so I don't fall into the Latina emotional trope, right? How much of what I ask for and demand for is taken? How much do I have to work extra hard while, I see others, mediocrity, if you will, sort of rise up the ranks, and I'm still being, given the most complex and hardest assignments. All of us still are experiencing that. And I think that there's power in being able to have that, what 2020 did, which was that it took the cover off of organizations and said, like, you're just not as good as you say you are. And everybody knows it now. And now that that's there, it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? And those of us who are working internally and receiving the support of all of you in driving this work, it's how do we operationalize this so that, you're right, managers can think about this more constructively and diligently and consistently in their decisions every single day. And it's about decision-making. I call them decision-making filters, right? We all have them, but we sometimes don't even know which filters we're using for making decisions. Making sure that equity and inclusion and belonging are part of those filters. The outcome will be dramatically different when you do that every single time.
Let's talk about managers. Actually, I mean, there's so much pressure on the private sector. It's come up a lot with all of you, the role of manager and the day-to-day experience of women and women of color in particular. There's pressure on the private sector to step up and lead in things like racial justice, mental health, caregiving. And also the role of manager has changed so much in the past 2 years. And now managers have to kind of step up and lead in all these areas without much training, if any at all. And so I'm curious, like, what role do you think managers play in well-being, in trust building, in modernizing professional norms? And what ideas do you have for managers to improve the day-to-day experience of women? Massella, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah. Well, managers, especially from a LifeLabs perspective, is like, managers are everything. Managers are the catalyst for, I believe, like safety and comfort in a workplace. Like even just when I think about the perception of roles, right? So here I am in this room with Daisy, and what I know to be true about Daisy is that Daisy cares and Daisy wants to create a work environment that people feel good about, that they can come to, that they're proud of. But not everybody can necessarily give Daisy that benefit of the doubt. The person that they talk to day in, day out is the person that's going to be there to facilitate the experience of generally what your people team is trying to foster around you. And so I think there are two major things that need to happen. One, people teams need to be better connected with their managers. Of course, that comes in the frame of training and support, and like real training, not just on how to coach or give feedback, although we of course support that. Come to LifeLabs, we're here for it. But beyond that, it's even things that we've been thinking about, like internally. What does a manager do when an employee experiences a microaggression? Like these things, how do I handle the conversation? Because they're not easy. There's discomfort for a number of reasons. One, somebody's own personal discomfort that we can't necessarily dismantle because of whatever history they have with it, but also because like you are the person that is generally going to set the path for where those repercussions come to play. So is this an accident? Sure. Okay, let's figure out how to give feedback about it. You need a manager who's equipped with being able to have those conversations. I think beyond those types of things, like managers can be fully invested in like getting to know their people. I know that for a lot of folks, it feels so like, well, that's not focused on work and I'm busy and there's too much to do. But I can promise you that your investment in your people, into who they are as humans, even just checking in, they told you that they went to a wedding or didn't go to a wedding or whatever the case is in the past weekend. How are you? How is that going? Like it goes such a long way. And I too get into the rut of like, we got so much to do, and you jump right into the conversation. But what it takes for one, you to be vulnerable yourself by not only asking questions, but sharing about who you are and your perspectives, I think goes a really long way. And two, I think keeping curiosity in mind goes a very long way as well. As managers, it's really easy to be prescriptive. Oftentimes there's a fear of wanting to look good, look smart, have all the answers. And I'm here to tell you that like it's complete bullshit. I've never had a manager that I was like, oh my gosh, they just know everything and that's what it is. No, I appreciated that even if they knew more than me, it was about bringing me into the fold. It was about having conversations. It was about partnership. And so instead of thinking about it as managing, we don't manage anybody's life. And even at LifeLabs, we've shifted from this title of manager to role sponsor, where here, I'm here to sponsor an experience about how to kind of make your life here as successful as possible and care about you as a human being. And I think less than verbiage, it's about how you approach the individual human.
I love that new terminology, Massella.
Yeah.
Because it really is. And we've long been reading the history and the research that people don't leave companies, they leave managers, right? That's their direct impact. But managers' roles now is not just about leadership and inspiration and motivating teams to do work. It's also about protecting them from harm. And that's a new piece that for a lot of managers is like, whoa, like I don't even know what that means, and how do I go about that? I hate to sound like I'm plugging, but one of the chapters in my book is called "Tune into the whispers and the screams and everything in between," because it really is about listening. It's about listening to the subtle whispers. And I'll use this as my example of coming into the workplace and all of a sudden realizing all the people of color and the marginalized employees, we were all huddled in corners talking about the mistreatment that we were feeling, the marginalization we were feeling, but we didn't feel we had the voice to speak. Now we're in workplaces where there's more screams, and the screams come from social media mostly, right? But it's those loud, the loudness of it. There's also a lot of in between, and that's where a lot of the pain and the sore spots in organizations that can be solved. And a manager that's attuned to all of that manager changes outcomes.
Yeah. I also want to quickly add, somebody added in the chat, what does it look like in action when you talk about like training a manager on how to, support somebody when they've been microaggressed? I think it's a few things. One, we try to really help people think about not going into it trying to convince somebody of something that they didn't experience. So a lot of times managers, oh, I know so-and-so, and they didn't mean it like that. I can understand why it's hurtful, but they didn't mean it like that. And what you're not understanding is that that completely negates this person's experience and tells them it's not valid and closes the door for them to want to come to you and have conversations like this in the future. Yes, it could be that the person's intention was not in line with the impact, but intention and impact are very different things. So one, we're talking to managers about, what do you do when you hear that for the first time? You ask questions, you check in with the person. How are you feeling? Almost less about the aggressor and more about the person that's been impacted. We miss that a lot. The other thing that comes next is trying to help your person decide what they want to do with it. Is this something that we need to go to HR for? Is this something that we want to have a conversation with the other person for? And while it's never the responsibility of the person who's been microaggressed to feel that they have to have a conversation with someone, so often I know for myself, I've not had conversations because I didn't know how to. Like, what am I supposed to say to you? Because this is clearly how you think, and maybe it's somebody who's in a role that is higher than mine or whatever. And so we are trying to equip managers with at least some sort of a formula or a template, having a partner in the conversation to say, if you want to speak for yourself in this situation, although I can do it for you, here's what it might look like. Here's what you need to share. Saying that it hurt your feelings is more than enough. You don't need to give them some database point about like, it in fact, no, it doesn't impact the business. It makes it hard for me to work with you if I don't feel like you respect me. Simple. But yeah, the equipping people of knowing what to say, how to approach people, and directing them in the right place so that it's a long-term solve, not accepting that some of my team members will talk to me this way from time to time.
Thank you so much. And I just have to say thank you. I'm sure other people are, I'm seeing in the comments too, like, thank you for just being so candid. And these are the conversations that should be happening and need to be happening more. So thank you so much. I just put a note, everyone, feel free to share questions. I have one more question and then yes, questions for the panelists. Okay, so this session is about return to work. This is a really challenging moment for organizations, the Great Resignation, intensifying war for talent, the rise of employee empowerment. What do you think the most important steps will be in the next few months for companies to support women in this great return to the office? So Ms. Nikoa, actually, I'll start with you. I know you've given us some great advice, but if you had in the next few months, for anyone listening, what are the 1 to 3 things that you think are most important to be focusing on right now?
So I will say again that Black women are traumatized, and we have so much to lose by calling out microaggressions and racism. And we oftentimes don't have a nest egg saved up or parents who can support us if we lose our jobs. So, we typically call on allies to do more work. But what allies have been for me in the past are folks who recognize the racism, but aren't necessarily willing to sacrifice anything to call it out. A perfect example of this is one of my corporate jobs. There was a racist incident that took place, and I was very visibly upset. And the allies, they knew what was happening, and they all apologized in private about their coworkers' behavior, but they did nothing to address it. And I chose to call it out, and needless to say, I'm no longer employed by that company. But so many Black folks have gotten to a point where they're not willing to risk it all. So they suffer in silence and then side-eye the allies. So what I think can be done is that, allyship needs to turn into more of a co-conspirator relationship, more of an accomplice relationship. And we need folks to get equally upset about racism and use their privilege to hold their counterparts and even their rock star bosses accountable, so that the lone Black person with everything to lose isn't always the one with the loudest voice. The time is up for performative allyship, whether it comes to individuals or to corporations. This isn't new to us. White America woke up after George Floyd because, in my opinion, everyone was in their house, losing their minds due to quarantine. But there were thousands of similar cases before George Floyd that the Black community was keenly aware of. So, we're like, great, you guys have all recognized that America has this problem, but we don't have much time. We don't have any more time for corporate America to get its shit together. Like, we've run smooth out of patience. And if you continue to underutilize us and to mistreat us, Black talent is going to exit, and we're going to start our own companies, and we'll become your most fierce competitors. And no, you guys don't want that. You don't want that. So we need to all, take this very, very seriously, because we really are at a crossroads when women, Black women, women of color, we're tired of dealing. So I don't know if I gave you any tips, but I think this is what needs to happen, because we're like a day late and a dollar short.
I'm looking at the questions, Erin. I don't know if I'm cheating, but I'm trying to see if we answer, if some of the things that we answer here can be helpful to folks. And so I'm gonna just switch the answer a little bit to answer some of these questions. Because I do think that I think organizations are, for the most part, and I'll say organizations always have good intent, but the outcomes don't always show that, right? Because they're not, as we've all said, they're not taking into effect the voice of those that they need to solve for. And that's the voice, as we're talking about, of women of color, of Black women in particular. What are their needs? And even as I think it was Massella who shared earlier, even as a Latinx, I have a 13-year-old. My needs are very different from someone that may have a 5-year-old, right? My kid can make her own sandwiches and be locked up in her room all day because she wants to, not be with me all day long. A parent that has, I just had a meeting today with one of my team members. I just had a team member she's in the UK and her son was sick, so he's home with her, and he was like hanging on to her the whole time that we were having our meeting, and that's fine. Like that, her brain doesn't stop working because of that. She may be slightly distracted because he's going, "Hey, mommy, can you draw this for me?" But we were able to still have the meeting that we needed to have. She was able to still, give him, the care that he wanted in that moment, and we were able to solve for what we needed to solve for. And and all that required was, me being able to put myself in her place and knowing that if she didn't want me to cancel the meeting, because that would have made her feel even worse, right? My first reaction was like, let's cancel the meeting, we'll have it again. She's like, Daisy, I'm too busy, it's going to take too long, let's get this sorted now. Or like, can you tell your kid to not be there, which would have been horrible, but it's like, it's simply, we just had the meeting, and I looked at her with the human lens, and we talked about him losing his 2 front teeth. It was a fun conversation, and it was an effective conversation. That applying that lens is going to be really critical and important. That's what managers and leaders and colleagues. We've been talking a lot about managers and leaders, but let's not forget the experience that you have with your colleagues, because your colleagues can also give you side eye when you need extra time or attention to take care of your kid. Your colleagues can also derail you from getting the attention and the support that you need. So this is everybody's job. And as women, we need to make sure that we are truly supporting each other and understanding each other's lived experiences as uniquely as they are, so that we can create space for delivering on what we need to deliver at work, and that we can create safe spaces for us to be able to just lose it when we need to and create the moments to breathe, because life is happening all around us 24/7, and it's happening to us as we're working. So I think that that's some of those pieces. And the other piece I will say, and this is, I'm thinking about our sponsor, and I'm thinking about the world that we live in, and it's just not lost on me that we're living, particularly in this country, at a moment where reproductive health and maternal health are under attack. And in a country that does not offer paid family and medical leave, the responsibility does fall on companies to deliver that in an equitable way. And so it could be felt as a burden, but it is a responsibility. And we advise, and other companies that I know look at that work as a competitive advantage for sure, but as a way to make sure that we are delivering for our employees what they need and when they need it. Because if they're not being provided that outside of our workplaces, it is our responsibility to ensure that they do, so that they can be productive workers and happy, healthy humans.
There's a question here that's asking around examples around like boundaries that you can set to support yourself. And it sort of ties in with the question that somebody's asking Victoria about empathy and like, can it be taught? So to Desiree's point, yes, I think it can be taught, but I think for today's world, right? Like, we know that old habits die hard. And instead of looking at this as like, here's an empathy training, or here's a way to think about it as a systems way of being. So for example, I had somebody on my team share with me recently that they're like, hey, we have like a pretty meeting heavy Friday. This has like always been the case at LifeLabs. And we try to work on it and try to adjust and try to change things, but it's hard. Like you're working with people in different time zones. You're trying to get things done. Nonetheless, though, what can happen, especially with a bigger team, all on one Zoom screen during a team meeting, is like, it's hard to stay engaged. And there was this sort of fear of like, well, if I'm doing something that's helping me to focus, will I look bad? Will people think this thing of me? And it would have been easy enough for me to say, oh no, don't worry about it. And I did say that, but I also said, well, how can we make sure that this is widely known to the team? That's a system. A system is saying, hey team, you might be somebody who has a hard time focusing during our large team meeting. So feel free to do whatever it is that you need to do to be able to focus. Maybe that's knitting, maybe that is turning your camera off for a moment, maybe that's stepping aside. And if you see somebody who's doing something other than staring blankly at us, that doesn't mean that they're not there. That doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. So it's not just about a yes to one person, it's a yes to everyone, and really thinking about, okay, how can I systematize this so people don't have to like think so deeply, which are some of the things that are just so tolling on a day-to-day basis at work. Around other types of boundaries, so just like examples, we have long thought about, well, how do we navigate the work hours thing? People say, for a while we were doing this thing where we'd be like, schedule your emails out into somebody's business hours. But given how that works with people working all around the country, it's impossible. Like 8 a.m. my time is 5 a.m., which is not somebody's working hours. So while it's hard to just say, I'm not going to schedule them out, we've decided to create a rule where it's like, if you really need my answer, you put it in the subject line. It needs to happen at this time. And just because you have sent something, just like a text message, doesn't mean it needs to be answered right there and then. But communication around those types of things go a long way. It's not perfect. And so I think with any of these things, you want to keep in mind that it is a learning process and feedback needs to be a part of it. So it's not just a one and done, we said it, it's saying, hey, we tried this for a quarter, is it working or is it not? And I think that conversation, co-creation of better systems to serve more people in your organization will go a really long way. The last thing I'll just talk about in terms of, sorry, Daisy.
No, go ahead.
One more boundary here. The feeling, I think, for a lot of parents with their teammates, with their leaders around like, am I doing enough? Is this working? Companies can think about how to ease them back into the workplace. So for example, like when somebody goes on parental leave at LifeLabs, the first week that they're back, and I think it extends way beyond that first week, but initially in the first week, it's much slower. The people understand, hey, so-and-so has just come back. Here might be their working hours. Here are the things that we're not going to ask them to do. But again, it can't just be a conversation between one person. There needs to be a general global understanding of what the boundaries look like. Last thing that I will say, I remember very, very early on, years ago, I started working at Warby Parker, and this is when startups really became like startups. Like everybody loved the tech title and everybody was the Warby Parker of. And one of the things I loved about working at Warby Parker was that it just felt like work could be different. And I was like, wow, it could be fun and you could like the people you work with. Like it didn't feel stuffy like what I thought work had to be. And obviously much has happened since that time and much has evolved, but now this time that we're living in is super exciting. It feels reminiscent about that. And so what I encourage all of you to do is to sit down and really ask yourself what it is that you need and be bold and have the gall to ask for it. Because like, we don't have to be what work used to be. We can tell people, hey, I'm looking for remote work. I'm looking for hybrid work. I'm looking for these hours. Like ask for what you want. It is so possible. And if we don't do it, like I think we do a lot of overcompensation. Everybody's overcompensating because they don't want to get in trouble or they don't want to look bad. You don't really have to. Just be honest about what you need. I know it doesn't just work that way, but I think it goes a long way in helping people understand what's available to them.
I love that. And actually, we talk to companies a lot, and we have this 2x2 that's like and dislike and pre-pandemic, pandemic, so that people can start seeing what it is they want to never do again, and what is it that they want to, how do they want to design their days and their lives and what's important to them. So it might be a yoga class or a Spanish class in the middle of the day. It could be picking up your child out of necessity, or you just have loved doing that, or family dinner. So I think that's such a good point too, that like actually to help empower employees in a moment where work is changing, that they actually should do that work too, to understand what they want and need as well. I'd love, Daisy and Nikoa, I'd love for you to answer the balance question. The question is, like examples of boundaries you've set for yourselves. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll balance that challenge. Nicole, I'll start because I think, you know, I was nodding my head with Massella and what you're saying, Erin. I find that there's so many times, even with my own team, and I think I try to, you know, norms get set over years of practice and behaviors and modeling, right? So like we're in the biggest renegotiation of work right now, and we are just resetting norms everywhere. So everything's up for grabs, and there's an opportunity to your point, Massella, to ask for what you need and to renegotiate what that looks like for you. And even as much as I say that and try to model that for my team, I find that sometimes even my team gets worried about, like, you know, I had to put a line. I do a weekly note to my team. I had to put a line and tell them, it's like, you don't need to tell me when you're going to the doctor's. It's okay. Like if you have, like, I would have my team member goes, I'm not going to be available between 1:30 and 2:30 because I'm going to a doctor's appointment. I was like, oh my goodness gracious, I don't need to know that. I was like, I appreciate it. I thank you. But if I don't hear from you in an hour or two, you know, I would just assume that, you know, like, you know, unless it's an emergency, which there really are rarely any of those, I don't need to know that. What I do want to know is, what is it that helps your day-to-day be more productive and more energized? And it's, you know, your walk with your dog, your yoga class, your, you know, your kids' soccer games. Like, you know, I don't need to know exactly as on a Tuesday or Wednesday, but what I need you to know that it's okay for you to make that time up. Somebody was asking for half a day off because they were going to go to their kids' soccer game. And I was like, goodness gracious, no, you don't need to request a half day off. You put in 6 extra hours last week finishing that report. It's like, but we can negotiate that. And I think that we have fallen into this trap of rigidity, and some companies are very rigid. So, you know, for those of you who are there, I apologize. But we have fallen into this false sense of rigidity, and we forget that sometimes by just asking and putting out there what you need, all of a sudden you demystify it, and it's like, oh yes, that's that 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You can still get done what you need to do today. That's absolutely fine. And I think that we've just lived, we have lived so afraid of our own shadow. We've become so afraid of asking for the things that we need. I say this, particularly women of color. We're afraid of asking for nice things. it's like somewhere along the lines someone told us we can't get nice things, but everyone else is getting like shiny, bright objects all around them. It's like, well, then ask for the nice things that you have, because half of the time, those nice things that you're asking for are just basic things that we need as human beings, and that your manager, if they're fair and thoughtful and, you know, and willing to, you know, make sure that they're creating a great experience for you, will give to you. And if that doesn't happen, then those are signals for you probably not being in the right place, or things have to change for you, or renegotiated. And that is not a us versus them mentality. I you know, obviously as a chief people officer, I'm very much about reminding employees how hard my team works to create great conditions for them. But I always remind them, I was like, I need to know from you what you need, and we need to figure out what's the negotiation between us so that we can create the right experiences for you. And I think that's the boundaries. And the last thing I'll say, Erin, is that around boundaries, you know, everybody was burnt out, you know, continues to be burnt out last year. Everybody was, you know, we like many companies gave like a full, we used to call them days of pause, where we gave a whole company day of pause for everyone to rest. And we found that those were okay, but not necessary for some, or not being able to be applied for some folks. So we now do Focus Fridays, which is our version of no meeting Fridays. But we realize that in a business like ours, which is production based and, you know, journalism, like not everybody can take off a full day, right? People are on deadline, they have to deliver. But we call them Focus Fridays because they're days that we try to, I tell them, and I remind people, protect your calendars on Fridays. Protect them as much as you can. So those days you can create. You can imagine, you can go for a walk around the park to just clear your head. And that's something that we use globally. And it's one of the favorite things that everyone tells me they love from what we offered last year. Of all the things we did, which we offered a lot of great things, that's people's favorite day.
Yeah. We do the same thing. So yeah, it's great. I heard so many things in what you said. I mean, I think you're right. Like the rigidity of work is largely gone. Flexibility is here to stay. I think making the implicit explicit is really important. So like the amount of energy that employees spend trying to figure things out or understand, like, is it okay if I go to the doctor, and just being told that it is okay, and then normalizing taking these breaks are so important. So yeah.
Can I jump in for 1 second, Erin? So the way that I manage boundaries is that I just meet my team where they are. I meet them at a very human level. You know, I have shitty days where I don't want to show up to meetings, and they do too, and that's okay. And I'm lucky enough to be able to build my team from the ground up. So I'm able to hire people that fit into the type of company culture that I'm trying to build. But I think it's really just as easy as meeting people where they are and being vulnerable. So my team knows, like, my kid is having a crisis in Ohio, I have to get to him, or like my anxiety is on 5,000 today, so I cannot take this meeting. So they in turn feel comfortable, telling me what they need because I tell them what I need. And I really don't think it has to be very difficult. I think we just need to go back to treating humans as humans and treating them as we would want to be treated if we were in their position.
Yeah, that modeling is so important too. Yeah, that's such a good point. So we have a few minutes left, and there's a question around like collaboration and connection. How do you, and there's obviously a lot of ERG leaders here that are representing a large percentage of women within their organization. So how do you think about collaboration and connection that's so important to, it's like the lifeblood of organizations? It's how information flows through an organization. How do you build that connection while we're mostly remote right now?
Set norms, whether you're remote, whether you're in person. Everything falls to shit when everybody's doing everything differently, or like it truly, and it blows my mind. Like, at the start of this pandemic, we would hear companies saying to us, like, this is so hard and this is whatever. And then you'd be like, listening to what they're actually saying. I'm like, oh, so you're saying it actually sucked really bad before too? Like, if your systems didn't work then, they're definitely not working now. And they're definitely not going to work in 6 months from now. So it's like, how do we communicate things that are urgent? Do we text each other? Do we use email? Like, those norms for how to communicate are huge. And of course, you can't know the norm for every single person in your organization, but start with your smaller team. What's most important to people about not only communication, but even conflict norms? If XYZ happens, how do we approach it? How do we deal with this? Like, be on the side of predicting that these things are going to go down, because honestly, conflict happens in every single, even healthy relationship. There is such thing as healthy conflict. I think that conflict can be unhealthy when people are either pretending that it won't happen or assume that everybody's going to approach it the same way. So think about some norms that I think will work for your team. And then like the other thing to be considering around connection is also understanding that everybody needs very, different modes of connection. So for example, this Thursday it was Thursday and Friday, we had our team retreat. And this is like our 4th virtual one. And it was actually one of my favorites to date. And what I love about LifeLabs retreats is that it's, especially from in-person days, it was a time to kind of like just pause, like reflect on our mission, like why are we doing this, get to know one another, so on and so forth. But what can happen is that it can be really overwhelming. And while like I do this kind of work all the time, I'm definitely an introverted person. And then there's a time when I'm just like, okay, don't want to see any of you anymore. And like, it was just okay. Like we have a ground rule where it's like, you can leave now. Like you don't have to even say bye, do your Irish goodbye and just jump out of the Zoom if that's what you need to do. And so I think it's just like not assuming that everybody wants to go to the happy hour, not assuming that this is the day that works for everybody. How can we find a way to, again, co-create? Don't just be the manager or the ERG leader or whomever that says, this is how we'll do it. No, bring them in. And then even from there, we like to do this thing called an up check, unintended consequence. If we do it this way, what are like 2 things that could go wrong? Because then usually what it does is start getting us to sort of spur ideas for how to make it 10% better, or how to even just put people in a better position for this thing to work.
I love that, Massella. Our check is whose voice has been included and whose voice hasn't in this decision.
Yeah.
And for ERGs, we've been empowering them, our community groups, we've been empowering them to really bring in broader voices, connect with each other. I know there was a question before about how not all of the ERGs and companies work really well together, and that happens often. But it also has to come from the top and the bottom, right? So we encourage all of their planning. They have shared budgets that get assigned by community group. We create separate budgets for the leaders of ERGs it's not a whole lot, but we have budgets so that they are able to attend some leadership development on their own as well. And then what we do is that when they do that, we encourage them and bring that back to your community group. So there's shared learnings across the board. So that's, that there's those norms, and then there's those expectations, and then there's those implicit and explicit permission that we have to give people sometimes, because like the ideas are always there, but I just find that people are just worried about asking for what they want and they need. And sometimes you have to just give them the explicit permission to do that, to ask for it. And usually it's a yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Massella, Daisy, Nikoa. Thank you for such a rich conversation, for your sharp insights. You're sharing your experience. And this has been the best hour I've spent in, I don't even know since when, but you're amazing. I love this conversation and I appreciate you all. Thank you. And Terra Health and Fairygodboss, thank you for letting us do this. So thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.